really helping match talent to those opportunities. It's something I'm very passionate about as a big believer in the advancement of women in technology. And prior to the Mom Project, I have 10 years of experience in B2C and B2P product. Most recently leading the consumer product team of TripAdvisor, which has nearly 1 billion reviews. So I know a lot about trying to manage large amounts of data to actually create great products on the other side of it. But the most important thing to know about me is that I am a mom of 2 little kiddos living outside of Philadelphia.
Well done. Morgan?
Check. Okay, let me know if that's working or not. If it's not, I'll adjust my tone accordingly. Firstly, it's great to be here with everybody, and thanks for spending your time to be here in this session. Marcus Sawyer, I'm the founder and CEO of EQ Community. My history in the recruitment and HR tech space has been within the last 20 years. I started a company called careerbuilder.com, and then I led digital transformation as president of the Adecco Group's digital businesses, where I was buying, building, and investing in HR tech companies. Where I've really been focusing and spending a lot of my time has been around 2 things: inclusion and AI, which are 2 things that I'm really passionate about. And specifically within EQ, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more, is how can we bring people along the journey and also at the same time leverage the benefits of technology and artificial intelligence. So again, thanks for spending your time.
All right. I think.
Check.
Yeah, there we go.
That's better. There we go.
So again, thanks for spending your time, and if you didn't hear any of that, it doesn't matter because we're going to have a great discussion.
Do you see why we have the right people here to have a conversation today, right? So look, I think we all have an idea in our head about what AI is, and I bet if you ask 5 people, you'd get 5 different answers, right? So I thought we'd start with our experts today and really ask you all, how would you define AI? Marcus, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. So there are many different types of definitions, as Rocky had mentioned, but one of the ways that I think about AI, and let's also be clear, artificial intelligence, because it could be Allen Iverson, it could be any kind of AI that you want, is that it's really the tree and the umbrella in which humans have programmed some type of intelligence into a system. So the way that I think about it is artificial intelligence is taking data, which you then transform into information, and then you can then transform that information into insights, and then transform that into knowledge, which ultimately can lead to wisdom. We're probably not at the wisdom piece just yet. We're getting closer to the knowledge piece, and the use cases should be to solve important problems. So again, it's taking data and transforming that into information, the information into insights, and the insights into knowledge, which can lead to wisdom. So that's how I think about artificial intelligence.
Jess, how do you think about it?
I think Marcus described it well. I'll just say that I think how it's shifting is, in the past it had a lot more to do with kind of more of these transactional use cases, taking really repetitive kind of known tasks and then repeating it through understanding of the data. What's changed most recently is it's moved to more generative AI, where you're actually leveraging very mass amounts of data, and it's learning at a very rapid rate to actually generate, in a lot of respects, different outcomes. And so that's where you're kind of seeing this transition from really being able to leverage it for these repeatable tasks to actually being able to leverage it for more high value and, in some cases, more human-driven tasks.
I love that. So thinking about human-driven tasks, as a human, if you could use AI to do one main or mundane task for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Well, I love a fun question, and I mentioned I'm a mom of 2 toddlers, so my mundane task would definitely be meal planning for my toddlers, and this algorithm has got to be very deep learning and very fast to adapt, because I'll tell you, one week their favorite thing becomes the next week the source of a tantrum, and so I would love to have an AI model that would help me with meal planning.
I'm going to give 2 answers. The first one, and I don't mean with any of the solutions that you see today that exist, is do my taxes. That's the first one. And I mean, one button and it's done. The second one, and I think one of the really useful ways that we can leverage AI is to connect people. And so one of the tasks that I think a really important mundane task is anything that's involved in me connecting with people prior to that connection, any administration that's involved in that process, where I have to be or where I have to go or how I connect with people. If AI could automate that, that would be amazing to have more people connections.
Yeah. I think a lot of us traveling would love AI to be able to automate our expense reports so that when we got back, it would just be done for us, right? I think we all have something else in common too. As we all sit here, we're trying to figure out how AI can really help us with the candidate process, right? And so I want you all to think about and share with us your perspective on how AI can help us in streamlining the recruiting process. Jess, you've got the mic in your hand.
Yeah, I think it can help both in terms of the actual candidate's experience as well as thinking about the experience that the recruiter is driving in it. And this kind of gets at the shifts that I was talking about. So I think in some of the most traditional forms, you've seen it streamlining that process through better sourcing or being able to shortlist. But as you think about kind of more of this generative AI, what it enables you to do is to try to leverage it more so in some of these more kind of oftentimes human-driven tasks. So, before it was more behind the scenes, you can actually use it more powerfully now, kind of more front of how you're engaging with candidates or even on the client side. So you can think about it driving more lead nurturing campaigns where you're figuring out who to reach out to with what message in a much more scalable way, as we were talking about in the keynote today. So I think that what we're gonna kind of see is yes, you can think about going across the entire process and thinking about how it can leverage these kind of more repeatable tasks, but then also how can you leverage it for driving more high value tasks.
For sure.
Yeah, so just to touch on the candidate piece, I think that candidates want to ensure that they're being heard and they want to ensure that they're being seen. And we all know about the black hole problem. And I think there's a huge opportunity within AI to keep the candidates informed. We see it in our day-to-day lives, whether or not we're ordering a pizza or we're doing an Uber. We want to know, where is that person? How is that being tracked? And where am I in the process? So I think providing more transparent feedback in real time to candidates is a huge opportunity, and that will then allow that individual to basically have a better experience with that company, and also for the company to transact on some of the administration in a process that is a lot quicker, more effective, and more efficient. So those are some of the things I think about on the candidate side, and I think there's a ton more opportunities. And the other thing that Jess had alluded to with generative is there are opportunities to come up with new ways of doing things that we haven't thought of just yet. So I'm excited to see what those could be as well.
Yeah, and I hope that you all heard that, because what they both really addressed is there is business optimization that AI helps us achieve as we're doing this streamlining, but at the same time, it allows us to be able to make the candidate experience better. We've been talking about candidate experience for years, and none of us seem to have quite gotten it right yet, and this could be really another step along that process. For me as a DEI advocate, I spend time, and both Jess, Marcus, and I have had individual conversations about the impact and my concern initially about how AI will impact bias, right? Positively, negatively, is the AI bias, etc. So let's just have the conversation today. Do you think that there are ways that actually, instead of being biased, AI can help us alleviate some of the bias in the hiring process? Just you got the mic.
Yeah, I think using AI is not without its risk. If you were to ask, for example, ChatGPT, what's a great job for women, what's a great job for men, it'll tell you I'm not in the right job. So I think the reality is you gotta know what the data is trained off of. Is it trained off the internet? How do you feel about the data on the internet? Where do you wanna use it in different scenarios? So I think it's really important, again, to know that data source as well as how you're using it. I think we have to acknowledge, put AI aside, there's a lot of bias in the hiring process today. And so with AI, you have a choice on, do you wanna kind of continue to essentially kind of push that bias forward, or do you want to use it to more systematically guide it towards outcomes that you want to be different for your organization? If you train your data on biased hiring outcomes, you will continue to see biased hiring outcomes. If you source from pools of talent that don't have diversity as a kind of key attribute of your talent pools, you're going to continue to see those less diverse talent at the bottom of the funnel. Same thing about how you craft your job description. It kind of all gets back to that age-old saying, you really get what you give. AI will double down on that because it's learning from the outcomes and the data that you're feeding it. So on the other hand, you could think about how you better leverage it to control, again, the outcomes you want to achieve. And at the Mom Project, we've been very intentional about this, thinking about from the setup, from the beginning, around how we generate the outcomes we want to achieve. And that's why we've been very focused on not training our data based on hiring outcomes, but really training data based on understanding what is it the employer is really looking for, and how does a candidate align to that experience, and how do we create the right narrative around the candidate's experience to better position her story. A lot of moms don't have always the same traditional career paths, and very kind of pretty basic based algorithms are going to miss the story, they're going to miss the narrative, and that's why we focus on leveraging AI to really deeply understand the relevant experience, the nuanced skills that make her a great fit for that job, and show that story to the employer. The other thing I'll say is that you can have these strategies, but it's also critical to have strategies that actually measure the outcome and understand the impact on the other side. And so you can leverage things like being able to do audits with your teams, and ideally diverse teams, to give you feedback on the approach you're taking as well as the outcomes that are being driven, and even more kind of hardly leverage data like EEO reporting to see, well, what were the outcomes prior to leveraging AI, and then on the other side, how has that changed the picture, and what adjustments do you think you need to make? So again, I think it just really comes back to understanding your data, understanding how you're utilizing that data, seeing how that impacts the outcomes you want to take, and adjusting accordingly. So to short answer your question, I think it absolutely can, and I think it actually gives us more systematic ways of producing more ethical outcomes. But that being said, it has to be done with intention, or you're going to miss the mark and continue to perpetuate that bias.
Fair enough. Marcus, what's your perspective on this?
Look, I think when it comes to bias, one of the things that we have to be aware of and have a reality check on is that we're all biased. Everybody in this room is biased, and we have bias based on our experiences and based on the interactions we've had and things that we believe are going to help us with survival, just as human beings. So I think if you take that lens and you take that context, and you think about how has the AI been trained, and there's a lot of the conversation at the moment of the AI being biased, and what we have seen just kind of looking at this and inspecting and reflecting on it is it depends on how it's being trained. So to Jess's point around data, garbage in, garbage out, if you spend time thinking about intentionally how you're training models, then the impact, and there's a multiplier effect, for that output is going to be extreme, right? So you can do it on both sides of the table. One could be, hey, we can program this to be really biased in this sense of discrimination. You can program it in another way to be really biased in another sense of inclusion. And the question is who is the arbiter of the truth? Who decides? And it's all down to human beings. So then you've got to go back to morals. So I think AI can absolutely help with multiplying the outcomes that we actually have in society, but it will depend on how it's programmed. And just to give like a use case, we've been spending a lot of time on programming our models to ensure that you get more people at the top of the funnel. Because sometimes, and you all know this, if you're using a certain agency or use a certain firm and you go to the same people, you actually narrow down who you're going to be able to connect with based on who that company has in their database. But what you want to do is you want to widen that pool at first, but that becomes hard because you have to go through so many candidates and applicants, and I think that AI can also help you to go through that as well. So the net would be thinking about who's programming it, inspecting that, being aware of that, but knowing there are going to be bias, and do those bias support your beliefs, your purposes, and the direction that you want to go in.
Yeah. So Marcus, let's continue that conversation, right? So you just started to touch on moral implications, right? And we talked earlier about like, here's this intersection between the business objectives and the candidate experience, but how do you think the moral implications of utilizing AI specifically in the TA space intersect with the business objectives of the organization, and potentially how do we balance the two?
Yeah, so it was last week, I was having a conversation with my dad, and I was talking to him about these AI models we're building, this product that we have, and the way it's scaling. He's like, son, is this ethical? I'm like, Dad, what do you mean? He goes, son, is this ethical? So we had a deeper discussion, and I talked about, well, you know, that I'm building it, we're spending time on it, and we need to program it in a certain way to make sure that we include more people. So I think that ethics has to be baked into whatever you're building, and that comes back to the purpose. So think about the guiding light for any organization, historically and also now, right? It might be, profit might be at the top, right? But you probably want to start reversing that and having the purpose, then the principles, and then the profit. And I think that then how you incorporate AI into that value system will have a much more significant impact on how you're perceived, also have much more significant impact on who you can hire, and a huge impact on the candidates that, if you're recruiting, or the ones that you're hiring, or the ones that you are recommending to your clients or customers as well. So I think it starts with the purpose, and really going back to that purpose and see, does AI fit into our purpose, not the other way around? Right, so I think really spending time on that is going to be an important part of it.
Yeah, that's so well said. I think one of the ways that we try to live that is we oftentimes, when given a business problem or objective we're trying to solve, we start with, yes, absolutely understanding the problem, but then really looking at how humans are doing it today and understanding what's working really well, or also what opportunities present themselves. We call this exercise in our data science team being the algorithm. You're, as a human, trying to walk through either how it's being done today or understanding what are the opportunities to more advance it. And so you learn by doing, and then you think about, okay, now I'm going to take that into how I actually build the algorithm, and then have lots of feedback loops with the team directly to understand, is this driving the outcomes that we wanted to achieve? How do we think about the trade-offs that it's starting to present? What adjustments do we need to make? And the reality is that work is never done, because as these models also learn, you too need to stick with it to understand, is it continuing to perpetuate the outcomes you intended, or is, as markets are adjusting, you need to make changes along the way?
For sure. This morning when Peter opened, he talked about the changes we're going to see in the industry, right? He put up a slide that talked about some of the jobs that are going to be impacted, like, you know, production and customer service, and he encouraged those of us that place those folks to start thinking about it ahead of time. But on the flip side, he talked about the 97 million jobs that were going to be created. So we're in the midst of, you know, like a revolution in terms of work. So as roles shift based on AI, Like, how do you two think we need to rethink workforce planning?
Well,
Good question.
yeah, I took a deep breath. So
Yeah.
I'm going to take a step back and just think about what AI is again. So we talked about the definition, but what are the implications and how do people think about it? I was having a conversation the other day with a head of TA, and we had a really good chat and discussion around AI. He's told me that he started to use some of these services inside of his organization without other people knowing. And one of the things he mentioned, and I put it into an acronym, and AI is UPS. Okay, AI is UPS. It's useful, it's powerful, and it's scary. Right? So when you think about it in that context of, okay, we have these systems that we can use in certain ways, but they're super powerful. There needs to be some kind of guidance on how you can leverage that system inside of your organization, and also what the outcome could be. So I think just the management of that is really important, and we're probably not quite there yet. I know I'm not answering your question, so I want to make sure that I want to make sure that I do. Just on the last point, could you repeat that last point again, Rocky? Because I went off on a tangent here.
Yeah, so how do we balance, like we see our worlds of work literally shifting in front of us, right?
Yeah.
And how AI is impacting that. How do you think we rethink workforce planning?
So that was a brain bug, because you talked about workforce planning. I went down a completely different track. It was such a big question. I think with workforce planning in general, it always starts at the business need, and sometimes in TA or in staffing or in recruiting, we get those needs a lot later, so we kind of miss a lot in the translation. And I think that within workforce planning, there are a few questions that you have to ask. How critical is this role? And we're almost doing that already with the talent mix. Should this be temp? Should it be perm? Should it be freelance? But there's a bigger question on, do we actually need this position right now? And then what could that position become? And I think that you're also going to see that people are changing their roles. So you can do more with less in some scenarios, and you can also do more with more. So a scenario might be, take a copywriter, for instance, and you might want to do a press release about a specific product, and you might have had to go to a PR firm previously. Now you can kind of ask that AI, and if it's not a huge one, you can get some feedback. If you know how to inspect it, you can then put out your own press release within your group. Now, you might then decide, okay, now we're going to put out more updates around our products or our services and what we're doing. So then you might even increase the size of that team. But the team that you'll increase on won't be on the administration part, it will be on the knowledge base. So I think knowledge work has actually become a lot more valuable, and that becomes a much higher ticket item, but you're gonna have to really start to inject your brain power versus spending time on the administration piece. That's my point of view.
Jess?
Yeah, I think to the point this morning in the keynote on the maturity curve, I think we don't entirely know, but I think the principles said are right, which is it is going to shift jobs. Some jobs are going to be more impacted than others, but ultimately a lot of opportunity is going to be created out of it. I've seen, the slide today was saying that men were going to be more impacted than women. I've seen other, so I think people are kind of trying to determine what the impact will be. But I think even just seeing in early days, like we're starting to see more jobs come up for actually doing model training, or of course more jobs in the AI field, but it is going to shift what the opportunities are out in the market. And so leveraging, to your point on knowledge workers, leveraging that unique skill set that you have and actually being able to use it in conjunction with AI presents a really meaningful new opportunity.
Yeah. So I like to think about this. I think as I think about workforce planning, and if we know we have this big shift coming where we don't have a candidate pool that has the skills and abilities potentially to do the job, and we know that we've got people coming out of the market that aren't going to have jobs. If we're thinking about it from a workforce planning perspective, is there an opportunity to reskill in advance and have a competitive advantage because you've taken the time to do that? And is that one of the ways that, potentially is a positive implication where AI can make the candidate and employee experience better? So let's double down on that a little bit. What do you think are some positive ways, like real ways that people can think about and take away with them today that AI has made the candidate experience, whether contingent or direct, a more human-centric experience?
Yeah, I'll switch gears a little bit and just focus on the placement of that talent. So just maybe more kind of within TA and some of the things that we're starting to hear. We recently developed a model that allows recruiters to fill hard to fill positions and roles to help them do that. One of the things that came out of one of the groups that we had and one of the discussions was that's useful, but what's also really useful is we've got all these new jobs that are coming up. People are not aware of what those jobs are. New recruiters are coming into the business and they don't really know how to fill those positions or where to start. So we're actually seeing upskilling using AI on the side of training the recruiting teams and the hiring teams around the roles and positions that they have. So I think that AI actually can help as a co-pilot to train you when you get a new position that you haven't heard of, right? Let's take blockchain 10 years ago and everybody had to start doing their research on that immediately to figure out where do you find this talent, how do you hire it in? And I think that there's a huge opportunity there for the talent acquisition teams and the contingent workforce teams to really understand what that talent mix would be before you decide to hire for that role in that position. And then I think that bleeds into the candidate experience. Because if you know more about that role and know more about that position, you have better conversations with the hiring managers, you then have a more robust screening process where you ask candidates questions that are actually relevant, and then that experience for the candidates themselves becomes just a lot more elevated because you've done all of the checks and balances and the research beforehand. And I think that's a huge opportunity to do the training on what are the roles that you're actually going to be recruiting for.
Yeah, it really gets back to your conversation before about the black hole problem. And when you think about kind of boom in hiring times and also kind of when it's been harder on the hiring side, either way, the probably most consistent feedback is still this kind of, I think about the hashtag in LinkedIn a lot of times of do better. Well, it's a really hard job. There's a lot that you have to do along the way. And so, how ultimately AI can help you create more of that better candidate experience along the way, from being able to have the right outreach to even being able to give them feedback on areas in which they could upskill to have more relevance to the role. So there's certainly a lot on the recruiter side, but then also from a talent perspective, talk about the tool set you now have. It can help you with career planning, knowing what skills you need to add to your profile. It can help you with writing resumes that are more tailored. We know that's such a time-consuming process for our candidates. It can help you prepare better for the interview. So I think on both sides, we're going to see ultimately this experience be much better. So it's just a really exciting time to be able to leverage it.
Very cool. You all prep your questions. I'm going to ask them one more question. I'll open it up for Q&A. So I'd love to know, what are the coolest ways that you all are integrating AI into your work or into your business model?
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit about this, but I think in particular for women who might have less traditional career paths, some of these very basic models of the past that really look a lot of times at recent relevant experience, they don't tell the full story of somebody's relevant skill set for the job. They're missing out on the full narrative of the candidate. And so what we've been really working on is better understanding both job and candidate and being able to build that kind of pitch, that selling point for her experience. And then once you build, which is great about AI, once you build this skill set, you can leverage it in so many different ways. So we're using it to be able to tell employers why a mom is such a great fit for a job. We're on the flip side being able to tell employers or tell candidates why the job is such a good fit for them. On the other side of actually applying, we can talk about some of the skill gaps and how we can support her with upskilling programs. I mean, it's just, you build this capability and then you can imagine leveraging it throughout the entire process. So we're just really excited to make that more in the kind of soul of how we go about delivering for both our employers and our talent.
So there's a few ways we've been using AI, and first we were using it internally with our products and services. There were things like we get job descriptions, as you know, like 1 or 2 liners, and then how do you transform those job descriptions and actually understand what people are recruiting for? Everybody in this room has probably used AI in some sense for matching, whether knowing it or not, connecting candidates. And we saw a gap where there was an opportunity to embed inclusion into all the processes that we have and then expose it to anybody that wants to use it. So I've got one question. Has anybody heard of ChatGPT? Put your hand up. Okay, we're gonna put your hand up. Has anybody used it? Does anybody use it for work? Has anybody's company authorized they can use it for work? 2, okay, great, amazing. So think of GPT for recruiting. So we built something called EQ Assistant, EQ.app. You can go on, we actually launched it today as an early access program, where you can go on and do anything from creating interviews, interview questions, screening questions, assessments, creating job descriptions. You can also do sourcing, so you can find new places to source talent that you might not have thought of elsewhere, and just have a continued conversation and create that for any role that you're working on, with the real focus on it being inclusive in the way that we're doing that. So that's what we've been working on, and it seems like it's saving people a lot of time. Yeah, which is the main thing.
This is not about being a commercial, but I will tell you, because I'm lucky enough to be an EQ ambassador, it is a really good example of what happens when the AI is trained properly, right? And by an expert with a focus on inclusivity, you know, and I've had the opportunity to test it, and the output is incredible. So then it does what we're talking about doing. It saves time, yet it improves the experience that candidates are gonna have based on the output. So, okay, who's dying to ask the question?